The Battle of Midway, June 4, 1942. As the first rays of sunlight broke across the endless Pacific Ocean, thousands of sailors looked toward the horizon without realizing they were about to witness one of the most decisive battles in military history. The sea appeared calm, almost peaceful, hiding fleets separated by hundreds of miles of water, yet moving relentlessly toward the same destiny. Within a single day, nations would lose ships they believed were invincible. Elite pilots who had survived countless missions would never return. Admirals would make decisions in minutes that historians would debate for generations, and the balance of power in the Pacific would change forever. This was the Battle of Midway. It was not simply another clash between two powerful navies. It became the moment when Japan's unstoppable advance was finally halted and the United States seized the strategic initiative that it would never surrender. To understand why Midway mattered so much, we must return 6 months earlier. On December 7, 1941, the quiet Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor erupted into chaos. Japanese aircraft filled the skies over Hawaii, dropping bombs and launching torpedoes against the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Battleships exploded in massive fireballs. Sailors leaped into burning, oil-covered water. Aircraft were destroyed before they could even leave the ground. The attack stunned America. In just a few hours, Japan had demonstrated that no nation, regardless of its size or strength, was beyond its reach. Across the Pacific, fear spread rapidly. Newspapers printed shocking headlines. Radio broadcasts carried reports of defeat after defeat. Many believed the Japanese Empire could not be stopped. And for a time, they appeared to be right. Japanese forces swept across Southeast Asia with astonishing speed. Hong Kong fell, Malaya collapsed. Singapore, once called the strongest British fortress in Asia, was captured. The Philippines came under relentless attack. Wake Island was overwhelmed. Dutch colonies rich in oil were seized one after another. Every victory strengthened Japan's confidence. Every defeat weakened Allied morale. Behind these victories stood the Imperial Japanese Navy, considered by many to be the finest naval force in the world. Its aircraft carriers operated with remarkable coordination. Its pilots were highly trained veterans with years of combat experience. Their confidence had been earned through discipline, preparation, and continuous success. Leading this powerful force was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Yamamoto understood something many Japanese leaders ignored. He had studied in the United States. He respected American industry and knew that if the war became long, Japan's chances of victory would steadily diminish. His solution was bold. Strike hard. Strike fast. Destroy America's aircraft carriers before they could rebuild. If America's remaining naval power could be eliminated, perhaps Washington would negotiate peace rather than continue an expensive war across the Pacific. The key to that strategy was a tiny coral atoll known as Midway. At first glance, Midway seemed insignificant. It consisted of only a few small islands surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean. There were no great cities, no factories, no vast populations. But appearances were deceiving. Midway occupied one of the most important strategic locations in the Pacific. Whoever controlled it gained a vital forward base for aircraft and naval operations. From there, future attacks against Hawaii became far more realistic. If Midway fell, Japan's defensive perimeter would expand dramatically. If Midway survived, America would retain an essential position for future offensives. Both sides understood this. The battle for a tiny island would ultimately decide the future of an entire ocean. While Japanese planners finalized their invasion, another battle was taking place far from the front lines. It occurred inside quiet rooms filled with maps, radios, papers, and exhausted intelligence officers. There were no explosions, no gunfire, only endless streams of coded messages. American cryptanalysts worked day and night attempting to break Japanese naval communications. Every intercepted signal became another piece of a massive puzzle. Progress came slowly. Many messages remained impossible to understand. But gradually, patterns began to emerge. One mysterious code repeatedly appeared. AF. Nobody knew exactly what AF represented. Some believed it referred to Hawaii. Others suggested Alaska. Several officers argued it indicated Midway. But suspicion was not enough. Lives depended upon certainty. Commander Joseph Rochefort proposed an ingenious test. Midway would transmit an uncoded message, stating that its water purification system had failed and fresh water was running dangerously low. If Japanese communications soon mentioned that AF lacked water, American intelligence would have undeniable proof. The message was sent. Hours later, Japanese radio traffic reported that AF was experiencing a shortage of fresh water. The answer was now certain. AF was Midway. The greatest intelligence breakthrough of the Pacific War had been achieved. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz immediately understood the importance of this discovery. For perhaps the first time during the war, America knew where Japan intended to attack before the attack actually happened. That knowledge offered an extraordinary opportunity. Instead of reacting after the invasion began, the United States could prepare an ambush. Orders were issued with remarkable speed. The aircraft carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and the heavily damaged Yorktown would sail toward a position northeast of Midway. Yorktown's participation seemed almost impossible. Only weeks earlier, during the Battle of the Coral Sea, the carrier had suffered severe bomb and torpedo damage. Japanese intelligence believed the ship had either sunk or required months of repairs. American shipyard workers received a different order. Repair her immediately. Thousands of workers labored around the clock. Steel plates were welded into place. Electrical systems were restored. Flight decks were rebuilt. Equipment was repaired with astonishing speed. What engineers initially estimated would require months was completed in only a few days. Yorktown sailed directly into one of history's greatest naval battles. The Japanese never expected to face her again. As both fleets advanced across the Pacific, young sailors continued their daily routines. Some cleaned aircraft. Others loaded bombs. Mechanics inspected engines. Pilots studied maps and reviewed attack procedures. Many wrote letters home during quiet moments, unaware that these would become the final words their families would ever receive. The ocean remained calm. The sky remained clear. Yet beneath that calm surface, two mighty fleets were closing the distance between them, carrying thousands of men toward a battle that would determine the future of the Pacific. None of them could see the enemy, but every man could feel that history was approaching. Meanwhile, more than 3,000 miles away, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto believed the coming operation would secure Japan's dominance over the Pacific. His confidence was not based on arrogance alone. Since the opening days of the war, the Imperial Japanese Navy had achieved victory after victory. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies had all fallen with astonishing speed. To many Japanese officers, Midway appeared to be the final step toward complete control of the Pacific. Yamamoto's operation was incredibly complex. Rather than sending a single fleet directly toward Midway, he divided his forces into several groups spread across hundreds of miles of ocean. The first carrier striking force, commanded by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, would launch the main air attack against Midway. Behind them sailed powerful battleships, including the legendary Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. Other task forces moved toward the Aleutian Islands to distract American attention. On paper, the plan looked brilliant. American forces would be confused by multiple attacks. Midway would be bombed into submission. Once U.S. carriers rushed forward to defend the island, Nagumo's experienced aviators would destroy them. After that, Japanese battleships would finish whatever remained. Everything depended on one crucial assumption. The Americans had no idea where Japan was going. That assumption was completely wrong. Hidden northeast of Midway, Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded Task Force 16 aboard USS Enterprise. Nearby sailed USS Hornet. A short distance away, despite her hurried repairs, USS Yorktown joined the waiting fleet under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. The three carriers maintained strict radio silence. No unnecessary transmissions. No lights at night. Every effort was made to remain invisible across the vast Pacific. The waiting tested everyone's nerves. Pilots repeatedly checked their aircraft. Armorers carefully loaded bombs and torpedoes. Mechanics inspected engines until every sound became familiar. No one knew exactly when the Japanese would appear. Then came the morning of June 4. Shortly before sunrise, Japanese lookouts confirmed Midway lay ahead. Almost immediately, Nagumo ordered the first strike into the air. One by one, aircraft raced down the carrier decks. Dive bombers, level bombers, fighter escorts. Within minutes, more than 100 aircraft climbed into the brightening sky, forming massive attack formations as they headed toward the tiny island. Watching them disappear into the distance, Nagumo believed the operation had begun exactly as planned. On Midway itself, radar operators scanned their glowing screens. Suddenly, multiple contacts appeared. The enemy had arrived. Air raid sirens echoed across the island. Marines rushed toward anti-aircraft guns. Pilots sprinted toward waiting aircraft. Some American fighters were already taking off as the first Japanese bombers appeared overhead. The peaceful morning vanished beneath explosions. Bombs crashed into fuel tanks. Runways erupted under heavy impacts. Buildings collapsed in clouds of smoke and dust. Machine gun fire swept across defensive positions. Columns of black smoke climbed high into the sky. Despite the destruction, Midway refused to surrender. Anti-aircraft batteries fired continuously. American fighters attacked wave after wave of incoming aircraft despite being badly outnumbered. Many of those young pilots flew outdated airplanes that could barely compete with Japan's famous Zero fighters. Still, they attacked anyway. Some never returned. Others landed with damaged aircraft filled with bullet holes. Every minute they delayed the Japanese strike bought precious time for the American carriers waiting beyond the horizon. After completing the attack, Japanese strike leader Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga transmitted an important message back to Nagumo. Midway had been damaged, but it had not been destroyed. Another attack would be necessary. That single report placed Admiral Nagumo in one of the most difficult command decisions of the entire war. His reserve aircraft remained aboard the carriers. Originally, they had been armed with torpedoes in case American ships appeared. Now they needed bombs for another strike against Midway. Nagumo ordered the weapons changed. Below the flight decks, crews hurried to remove torpedoes and replace them with land attack bombs. Fuel hoses snaked across crowded hangars. Bomb carts moved in every direction. Aircraft filled every available space. It became a dangerous maze of gasoline, explosives, and ammunition. Then everything changed. A scout plane finally reported what Japanese commanders feared most. Enemy ships had been sighted. The report was frustratingly incomplete. It mentioned American vessels, but not aircraft carriers. Nagumo hesitated. Should he continue preparing another strike against Midway? Or should he immediately rearm his aircraft for an attack against the newly discovered American fleet? Every minute mattered. Every decision carried enormous consequences. Without realizing it, the fate of the Japanese carrier force now depended upon time. Aboard the Japanese carriers, the atmosphere changed in an instant. Only moments earlier, sailors had worked with calm precision. Now, every man moved with desperate urgency. Hangar decks became scenes of controlled chaos. Bombs that had already been loaded onto aircraft were carefully removed. Torpedoes were rolled back into storage. New bombs were lifted into place. Fuel lines remained connected as mechanics raced against time. It was exhausting and dangerous work. Aircraft sat wingtip to wingtip across the crowded hangars. Beneath them lay stacks of ammunition, spare fuel tanks, bombs, torpedoes, and maintenance equipment. One mistake, one spark, could trigger a catastrophe. But Nagumo believed he still had enough time. He did not know that American aircraft were already searching for him. Hundreds of miles away, Admiral Spruance had received Midway's desperate reports confirming contact with the Japanese fleet. Without hesitation, he made one of the boldest decisions of the war. Although the exact position of the enemy remained uncertain, and some officers advised waiting until the fleet was closer, Spruance refused to delay. "Launch everything." The order spread across the American carriers. Flight deck crews sprang into action. Engines roared to life. Propellers blurred into spinning circles. Signal officers raised their flags. One after another, American aircraft raced down the wooden flight decks and disappeared into the morning sky. Dive bombers, torpedo bombers, fighter escorts. More than 100 aircraft climbed into the blue Pacific sky. Their mission was simple: find the Japanese carriers. Destroy them. The problem was that the Pacific Ocean was unimaginably vast. A tiny error in navigation could send an entire squadron hundreds of miles away from its target. Many pilots carried only enough fuel for a single search. If they failed to locate the enemy quickly, they would never make it home. As the American squadrons spread across the ocean, confusion began almost immediately. Cloud formations blocked visibility. Radio silence limited communication. Some groups became separated. Others flew different headings after interpreting navigation reports differently. Minutes turned into hours. Fuel gauges slowly dropped. Inside many cockpits, doubt began to grow. Had they flown in the wrong direction? Had the Japanese changed course? Were they searching empty ocean while the enemy escaped? Then another wave of American aircraft entered the battle. These were the slow, vulnerable torpedo bombers. Unlike the fast dive bombers flying high above the clouds, torpedo bombers had to attack at extremely low altitude. Straight toward the enemy. Straight into concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Their aircraft, the Douglas TBD Devastator, were already outdated. They were slower than Japanese fighters, poorly armored, and carried little protection. Yet their crews understood the mission. Someone had to attack first. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron of Torpedo Squadron 8 sensed that the main American formation was heading the wrong way. Ignoring the planned course, he trusted his instincts. Turning toward what he believed was the enemy's true position, he led his 15 aircraft alone across the Pacific. His gamble proved correct. Soon, black shapes appeared on the horizon. Japanese carriers, the greatest prize in the Pacific. Without fighter protection, without support, Waldron's squadron descended toward the sea. Japanese lookouts spotted them immediately. Alarms echoed across every carrier. Zero fighters screamed downward from high altitude. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The sky erupted with explosions. One by one, the slow American torpedo bombers were cut apart. Some burst into flames before reaching attack range. Others plunged into the sea trailing smoke. Pilots fought desperately to maintain formation despite overwhelming odds. Bullets ripped through wings. Engines exploded. Cockpits shattered. Still, they continued forward. They knew many of them would never survive. But turning back was never considered. By the time Torpedo Squadron 8 completed its attack, nearly every aircraft had been destroyed. Not a single torpedo struck a Japanese ship. The attack appeared to have failed completely. Yet something extraordinary had happened. To intercept the torpedo bombers, Japanese Zero fighters had descended to sea level. Carrier formations changed course violently to avoid torpedoes. Combat air patrols became scattered across the sky. Without realizing it, these courageous American crews had begun pulling Japan's defenses out of position. Their sacrifice was creating an opportunity that no one could yet see. High above the battle, hidden among scattered clouds, another group of American aircraft was still searching. Their fuel was running dangerously low. Some pilots had begun preparing themselves for the possibility that they would never find the enemy before having to ditch into the Pacific. Then, through a break in the clouds, a single destroyer appeared below. It was racing across the ocean at full speed. The ship had recently broken away from the Japanese carrier force while attempting to rejoin after attacking one of the American submarines. To most observers, it was just another warship. But to Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, it became the clue he desperately needed. Instead of ignoring it, he made a split-second decision. If that destroyer is moving that fast, it must be heading back to the carriers. McCluskey banked his entire formation and followed the destroyer's wake across the endless Pacific. That one decision would become one of the most important moments in naval history. Within minutes, dark shapes appeared through the clouds. Not one, not two, but the heart of Japan's carrier fleet. Far below, the Japanese fleet continued maneuvering through the calm Pacific waters, completely unaware that American dive bombers were now descending from nearly 20,000 feet. For several long seconds, the pilots could hardly believe what they were seeing. There they were. Akagi, Kago, Soryu, three of the most powerful aircraft carriers in the world. The very ships that had launched the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor only 6 months earlier. Their flight decks were crowded with aircraft being rearmed and refueled. Bomb carts stood between rows of planes. Fuel hoses stretched across the hangar decks. Mechanics rushed to prepare another strike, believing they still had time. They had no idea death was already falling from the sky. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey pushed the nose of his Douglas SBD Dauntless downward. The aircraft rolled into a steep dive. The airframe began to shake violently. Wind screamed across the cockpit canopy. The altimeter dropped with terrifying speed. Behind him, dozens of American dive bombers followed, each pilot locking his sights onto a different target. Japanese lookouts suddenly pointed upward. Tiny black dots had appeared directly above the fleet. At first, they seemed harmless. Then the dots grew larger. Within seconds, alarms echoed across every carrier. Dive bombers! The warning came too late. Most Japanese Zero fighters were still flying at low altitude after chasing the American torpedo bombers. The skies above the carriers were almost unprotected. For one brief, unbelievable moment, the American bombers owned the sky. McCluskey steadied his aircraft. The massive silhouette of Kaga filled his gunsight. He ignored the violent shaking of the airplane. He ignored the anti-aircraft shells exploding around him. He focused only on the center of the flight deck. At the last possible instant, he pressed the release lever. A 1,000-pound bomb fell away. The Dauntless pulled out of its dive only a few hundred feet above the ocean. The bomb continued downward. Seconds felt like minutes. Then, a blinding orange flash erupted from Kaga's deck. The explosion ignited armed aircraft waiting for launch. Fuel tanks burst apart. Bombs detonated one after another. Within moments, flames raced across the entire flight deck. At almost the exact same moment, other American pilots struck Soryu. One bomb smashed through the wooden deck before exploding deep inside the hangar. Another landed beside fully fueled aircraft. A third detonated among stacked bombs and ammunition. The carrier disappeared behind a wall of black smoke and fire. Then came the attack on Akagi. Only a single bomb scored a direct hit, but it landed in exactly the wrong place for Japan. It crashed through the flight deck and exploded beside aircraft loaded with fuel and bombs. The blast triggered a chain reaction. Explosions echoed from one end of the carrier to the other. Within minutes, fires raged completely out of control. The flagship of the Japanese carrier force had been mortally wounded. Admiral Nagumo stood in stunned silence. Just minutes earlier, he had commanded the most powerful carrier strike force on Earth. Now 3 of his 4 fleet carriers were burning. Officers rushed across smoke-filled corridors, attempting to organize firefighting parties. Damage control teams fought desperately against walls of flame that grew larger with every passing minute. Water hoses became useless as explosions destroyed pumps and shattered pipes. Steel twisted under unbearable heat. Aircraft melted where they stood. The carriers that had symbolized Japan's naval supremacy were rapidly becoming floating infernos. Above the battlefield, American pilots looked back in disbelief. Towering columns of black smoke climbed thousands of feet into the sky. The ocean below seemed covered in fire. Many pilots later admitted they could scarcely comprehend what they had witnessed. The attack had lasted only a few minutes. Yet in those few minutes, the entire course of the battle had changed. Still, the battle was not over. One Japanese fleet carrier remained untouched. Huryu. And aboard Huryu, Vice Admiral Taman Yamaguchi reacted immediately. While the other carriers burned behind him, he refused to surrender. Instead, he ordered every available aircraft prepared for immediate launch. If Japan still had one carrier, then Japan still had a chance to fight back.